Julian Assange has flown out of the UK after agreeing to a plea deal which will see him go free. The Wikileaks founder is being moved to the Northern Mariana Islands in the Pacific, where he's expected to plead guilty to violating U.S. espionage law. Assange was wanted for publishing classified U.S. military files on the Wikileaks platform, which he founded in 2006. He had been fighting extradition to the U.S. in Britain, where he spent the past 5 years in a high-security prison. Well, Assange's ultimate destination is Australia, his home country. Here's a bit of what Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese had to say earlier about the apparent end of the Assange case.
I've been very clear as both the Labor leader in opposition, but also as Prime Minister, that regardless of the views that people have about Mr Assange's activities, the case has dragged on for too long.
DW reporter Joel Dullroy is following this story from Sydney and joins us now. Joel, Assange is on his way to the Mariana Islands. That's a U.S. territory in the South Pacific. He's supposed to appear in court there. What can we expect?
Well, it's an unusual place for such a high-profile case to be being heard. And the reason it's going there is, according to the United States Department of Justice, Mr. Assange was worried about going to continental United States. He's long feared that he would face potentially the death penalty there. So he agreed to go to this U.S. territory, which is also the closest U.S. court to his home country, Australia. It's not clear if there's any kind of legal advantage for him to do that. But anyway, it's nearby. He'll be there tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. local time. Many people from the island are expected to show up and see his court case, which is an unexpected sensation in such a small little territory. And if all goes according to plan, he will plead guilty to one count under the Espionage Act of receiving and publishing confidential documents that were passed to him by Chelsea Manning. He's then expected to be sentenced, and his time spent in the UK prison system, about 5 years, could be taken as time served, and he's expected to be released and on his way back to Australia by the end of the week, potentially.
Now, you're in Australia, Joel. Assange is originally from there. What are people in Australia saying about his release?
Well, Assange has quite a degree of sympathy here in Australia. There are many people who think that this case has just gone on for too long, and even those who think he did anything wrong believe he's been more than adequately punished. The Australian Parliament earlier this year passed a resolution calling for him to be released. The Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has lobbied the US and UK leaders for his release. And we also heard from politicians today saying we shouldn't condemn him for accepting this plea deal because he should do whatever the hell he can to get out of the system. There's long been concerns about his health, his mental health, his physical health, and he's going to have quite a bit of recovery ahead of him. There are those also who think he should never have been prosecuted in the first place. The Australian Journalists Union put out a statement saying that the prosecution of Assange was an attack on the freedom of the press and on all journalists, because what he did essentially was journalism, publishing documents that basically revealed the misdeeds of the United States and the crimes of the United States in their war on terror in Iraq. So he's got quite a degree of sympathy. Of course, there are people who think he shouldn't have been released. One of those is the former US Vice President Mike Pence, who put out a message on social media saying that this would be a miscarriage of justice, saying that he thought that Assange should face the full extent of the law, which presumably means that he could have faced the death penalty. So you can see why there was a rush to get him out of that system. Of course, it has taken a very long time. By the time he gets back to Australia, it'll be the first time he sees his children, who he's fathered since he's been in the prison system. And by the time he gets back here, it'll be 14 years since the start of his legal ordeal. And people here basically have a fair degree of sympathy for him and think that enough is enough. It's time for him to come home.
Joel, thank you very much. That was DW reporter Joel Dullroy there in Sydney. Well, for more on this, let's bring in Rebecca Vincent here. She heads the international campaign section at Reporters Without Borders and joins us from Paris. Rebecca, thanks for taking time to talk with us. What do you make of this deal for Julian Assange?
Well, we are hugely relieved that he is now out of prison. He never should have spent a single day there. Of course, he spent 5 years in London's high security Belmarsh prison. He's been arbitrarily deprived of his liberty for more than 13 years. So this is a very long time coming, but a huge relief to those of us who have campaigned for so long for exactly this outcome.
This is a huge development in such a closely watched case. As you say, it's gone on for years. Has the plea agreement that we're learning about now been on the table for a while?
We're not yet able to comment on that. We haven't had the chance to scrutinize it ourselves, so we're waiting for that to be released as well. But we have long advocated, and I know others have as well, for a political solution to this case. There is a chance that there would have been a legal prevention of extradition. This was playing its way out through the UK courts, and we've closely monitored that process. But we had always said this is a political case and it may require a political solution. We had urged the US government long ago to consider other means of bringing this to an end. Ideally, we would have seen a situation where all charges were dropped and the case was simply closed. But the most important thing now is that Julian will not spend any further time unjustly behind bars.
Now, Julian Assange always said that what he did was not wrong, and yet now he's pleaded guilty. Has he changed his position on leaking the information that got him into trouble?
I certainly wouldn't read it in that way. And we don't believe he should have been targeted for this. We don't believe anybody should face such treatment for so long, more than a decade, for publishing information in the public interest. So the way that this was done leaves some room for concern. We also remain worried about the possible use of the US Espionage Act against others in this way. So this is one next step, is that law actually needs urgent reform. It was not intended to be used to target journalistic activity like this, but we have seen that it can be. So firstly, we need a public interest defense, but other reform to that law so that journalists do not have to worry that they can face similar treatment.
What signal would you say this sends to other investigative journalists or whistleblowers exposing government wrongdoing?
Well, we think that journalists, in particular those who report on national security issues, are a little bit safer now because of Julian Assange's release. But again, the way that he has been targeted for so long leaves cause for concern. The US is not the only government that pursues journalists that report on national security issues. We have noted this as a worldwide trend, including from some of the countries at the very bottom of our World Press Freedom Index. That's why it's so important that our democracies are held to account, that the standard setters, including the US, the country of the First Amendment, shows that it means what it says. And we hope that we will never again see such a persecution by a democracy committed to the values of freedom of expression and freedom of information, as we've seen with this way too long, dragged out prosecution of Julian Assange.
Is your fight, Rebecca, for Assange over his? Is it over with now? Now that he's being released, or will you campaign for him to be pardoned moving forward, assuming that he does then carry a guilty verdict on espionage?
Well, we'll have to scrutinize the deal itself. We'll be following closely what transpires today and hoping very much for the chance to speak to Julian when he is able to and learn what he would like next. We will continue to support. If he continues his legal fight, we will continue to support that. We will continue to support other journalists who find themselves targeted for their national security reporting. And again, we'll continue to campaign for reform of the Espionage Act in the US. The US has recently dropped significantly in our World Press Freedom Index, and this sort of casts a spotlight on other issues that need to be addressed there, particularly in an election year when we don't know what will happen in the administration to come. So this is a positive step, very welcome, and a huge relief to all of us.
Rebecca, thank you very much for talking with us. That was Rebecca Vincent of Reporters Without Borders in Paris.